My grandmother promised my daughter a college education. She wrote it down. She had it witnessed. She kept that promise in a drawer for 11 years while the money grew, $92,000, built from birthday checks and holiday transfers, and a standing monthly deposit that my grandmother set up the year my daughter was born. Then, at her own 82nd birthday party, surrounded by 40-something members of our family in a room full of balloons and catered food and people who had flown in from 3 different states, she looked directly at me and said, "I never promised that." And she handed every cent of it to my cousin Delia for a wedding that nobody in the room believed was going to last. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I reached into the bag I had set beside my chair before the party started and I pulled out a document that had been notarized on April 7th, 2013, the year my daughter was born, and I reviewed it aloud. Slowly, loud enough that the people at the back of the room had to stop their conversations to listen. The letter began, "This money was always for," and then the door opened, and the lawyer walked in. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this actually started, because you need to understand the kind of woman my grandmother is before you can understand why what I did next was not an act of cruelty. It was the only language she had ever respected. My grandmother's name is Rosalind Mace. She is 82 years old, sharp as a blade, and she has spent the better part of 6 decades running her family the way a general runs a campaign, with rewards for loyalty, punishment for dissent, and absolute silence about the rules until she needed them to change. My mother, Beverly, is her oldest daughter, which should have meant something in Rosalind's world. It didn't. My mother was always too soft for Rosalind's taste, too forgiving, too willing to let things go, too quick to smooth over a conflict before she had extracted every bit of leverage it contained. Rosalind respected my Uncle Dale because he was loud and certain and never apologized for anything. She respected my cousin Delia because Delia was beautiful in a way that reflected well on the family in public settings. She respected my grandfather because he had money and then, after he died, she spent 12 years finding new ways to respect his memory. What Rosalind never quite knew what to do with was me. I am my mother's daughter in every way that mattered to Rosalind: quiet, analytical, not inclined toward drama unless the situation required it. I went to college on partial scholarship and finished 2 years earlier than anyone expected. I got my degree in finance, moved back home for 8 months to save money, and then I left for good. I took a position at a risk consulting firm in Charlotte and I worked. I worked in a way that I think surprised even me, because the thing about spending your childhood being underestimated is that it gives you an unusual relationship with silence. You learn to let people assume. You learn that assumptions are a currency, and if you let people spend it freely enough, they eventually spend it into a corner they can't back out of. My daughter Macy was born in April of 2013. Her father and I were not married. We had been together 3 years, and we were good to each other, but the relationship had been running out of road for about 6 months before the pregnancy, and we both knew it. We handled it with more grace than most people manage. He is still in Macy's life. He is a good father. But raising her was primarily my responsibility, financially and otherwise, and I made my peace with that in the first week after she was born and never revisited the question. Rosalind came to the hospital. She held Macy for about 4 minutes, then handed her back and said, in the tone she uses when she thinks she is being magnanimous, that she intended to set up a college fund. She named a figure. She said it would grow. She said she wanted to do something meaningful for the family before she was gone, and that starting a fund for her first great-grandchild was the something she had chosen. My mother looked at me across the hospital room with an expression I had learned to translate years ago. It meant, don't hold your breath. But Rosalind did it. She called me 3 weeks later and told me she had spoken with her financial advisor and set up the account. She told me the initial deposit was $15,000. She told me she would add to it every year. She told me she had written a letter, a formal letter, witnessed and notarized, that named Macy as the intended beneficiary and described the purpose of the fund in explicit terms. I asked her to send me a copy. She said she would keep the original and I could have a copy when the time came. I said I would need a copy before then, for my own records. There was a pause. Then she mailed me one. I filed it in the folder I keep for documents that matter, and I did not think about it again for 3 years. The first time I understood that the promise might not be permanent was at Christmas of 2016. Macy was 3. My cousin Delia had just gotten engaged to a man named Trevor Ockheffer, who was charming and expansive, and who spent money in the way that people spend money when they are performing wealth rather than possessing it. The engagement party was at my Aunt Linda's house in Raleigh, and Rosalind sat at the head of the table and she glowed. She loved Trevor immediately. She loved how he laughed. She loved how he ordered a second bottle of wine without checking the price. She told Delia, loud enough for the room to hear, that she wanted to help make the wedding something none of us will ever forget. I was sitting 4 seats away. I heard it, I did not say anything. But I went home that night and I took the notarized letter out of the folder and I photographed it with my phone and I emailed the photograph to myself with the subject line, "Keep this. If you have ever been counted out by someone who should have known better, someone who had every reason to see you clearly and chose instead to see what was convenient, you know exactly what that particular silence feels like. It is not defeat, it is information." The second incident that mattered happened in March of 2019. Macy was 5. I had been at the consulting firm long enough that I had moved from analyst to senior associate, and I was making enough money that I had started thinking seriously about the future in ways that went beyond month to month. I had opened a separate college savings account for Macy, a 529 plan, through a financial advisor named Gordon Ellery, who I had met through a colleague, and who I trusted immediately because he had the rare quality of telling me things I did not want to hear in a way that made me grateful for the information. At Rosalind's Easter dinner that year, she pulled me aside in the kitchen before the meal and told me, with genuine kindness in her voice, the kind of kindness that always made me most nervous, that I should think about Macy's future more seriously. She said the fund was growing, yes, but that she worried about me. She said she was not sure I was planning adequately. She told me that a woman in my position, meaning, she clarified, a single mother without a husband's income, needed to be more intentional about money. She suggested I speak with her accountant, a man named Gerald who had handled Rosalind's taxes for 30 years and whose advice, she implied, would benefit me enormously. I thanked her. I smiled. I did not mention that Gordon Ellery had called me that morning to walk me through the quarterly summary of the 529 I had opened for Macy 18 months earlier, which at that point held $41,000 in contributions and growth combined. I did not mention that the risk consulting work I had been doing for the past 4 years had landed me a client list that was expanding faster than I had planned for, and that I had been having very quiet conversations about the possibility of building something more independent. I thanked my grandmother for her concern, took a piece of bread from the basket on the counter, and went back to the table. The third incident was the one that made me move differently. It was November of 2021. Macy was 8. Delia and Trevor's wedding, which had been planned for the spring of 2020 and then postponed twice due to circumstances that involved a great deal of drama I was not centrally involved in, had finally been rescheduled for the following June. The budget for the wedding had, by all accounts, grown significantly. There were conversations happening in my family that I was not part of, hushed phone calls between my mother and her sister, a dinner between Rosalind and Delia that my mother described to me afterward with a careful neutrality that told me she was leaving things out. I had lunch with my mother in November and she told me, in the way she tells me things that she is afraid will upset me, that she thought I should know Rosalind was considering redirecting the college fund. I set my fork down. Redirecting it how? My mother touched the side of her coffee cup. She does that when she is stalling. To help with the wedding. She has been talking to Dale about it. She says Delia needs it more right now and that Macy has time. I looked at my mother for a long moment. Has she mentioned the letter? Nora. My mother said my name the way she says it when she wants me to understand she is caught between two things she cannot reconcile. You know how she is. I did know how she was. That was exactly the point. I paid for lunch, I drove home. I called an attorney named Colette Varga, who had been recommended to me by Gordon Ellery 2 years earlier when I had questions about a contract clause in my consulting work, and who I had kept in my phone because some people you keep in your phone the way you keep a fire extinguisher, not because you expect a fire, but because you understand that fires do not send advance notice. I did not tell Colette everything that day. I told her enough. I told her I had a notarized letter from a family member promising a sum of money to my child, that I had reason to believe the promise was going to be broken, and that I wanted to understand what my options were if it happened. Colette listened. Then she said, in the calm way she has of delivering information that lands like a stone, "Bring me the letter." I drove to her office on a Thursday afternoon in late November. Colette reviewed the letter, asked me 4 questions, and leaned back in her chair. She was quiet for a moment in the way that lawyers are quiet when they are arranging something in their minds before they speak. "This is enforceable," she said. "Not automatically, there are steps. But the language is specific, the notarization is valid, and the fund exists. If the money is moved without your consent, there are remedies. I asked her what kind of remedies. She told me. I took notes. We scheduled a follow-up for January. What I did not tell Rosalind, what I did not tell anyone in my family, was that 3 weeks after that meeting with Colette, I had a longer conversation with Gordon Ellery about the 529 account I had been building for Macy on my own, separate from anything Rosalind had established. At that point, with contributions I had made every month since Macy was 18 months old, plus the growth over 8 years, the account held just over $86,000. Gordon told me that if we maintained the current contribution rate and the market behaved roughly the way we expected it to, Macy would have somewhere between $160,000 and $190,000 available for college before she turned 18. I thanked him. I drove home. I made dinner. I helped Macy with her third grade spelling words. Nobody in my family knew any of this, not my mother, not Dale, certainly not Rosalind. This was not because I was hiding it from them out of shame. It was because I had learned, over 37 years of being Rosalind Mace's granddaughter, that information in her family was not neutral. Information was leverage. Information was something you handed to someone who would decide what it was worth and then use it accordingly. And the thing about keeping your information private is that, when you finally choose to use it, nobody can take the impact away from you. The second close call came in the spring of 2022, about 6 months before Rosalind's birthday party. I was at a family dinner at my Aunt Linda's house, one of the regular Sunday gatherings that Rosalind has organized for as long as I can remember, where attendance is not technically mandatory, but refusal is remembered. My Uncle Dale had had 2 glasses of wine and was in the mood to give financial opinions, which was his preferred mode of bonding. He asked me in front of the table whether I had thought about what I was going to do about Macy's education. I said I had thought about it quite a bit. He said that was good because, obviously, with the fund situation being what it was, and here he paused, glanced at Rosalind, and adjusted his vocabulary with things being complicated, it would be smart to have a backup plan. The fund situation? I said. My voice was completely level. Dale looked at Rosalind. Rosalind looked at her plate. My mother across the table reached for her water glass without drinking from it. Rosalind has been thinking about priorities, Dale said. Delia has needs right now. Macy's young, there's time. I looked at my uncle for a moment, then I said, I appreciate the heads up, Dale. I'm not worried about Macy's future. He seemed slightly puzzled by this, the way people are puzzled when they brace for an argument and encounter only calm. You're not. No, I picked up my fork. She's going to be fine. Rosalind looked up at me then. She studied my face for a moment with those eyes that have spent 82 years reading rooms, and I saw something shift in her expression, not understanding exactly, but the edge of a question she did not know how to form yet. I smiled at her. I asked Linda to pass the bread. What no one at that table knew was that the previous Wednesday, I had met with Colette Varga for the third time in 6 months, and that by the end of that meeting, I had authorized her to prepare a formal demand letter, to be held, not sent, until I gave the instruction. The letter documented the existence of the notarized promise, named the account, cited the specific legal language, and outlined the remedies available to me if the fund was transferred without Macy's interests being properly protected. Colette had also, at my request, done something very quiet and very specific. She had obtained the name of the account manager at the financial institution where Rosalind's fund was held and had reached out, through the appropriate channels, to flag the account with a notation that any transfer involving the beneficiary designation would require documented authorization from both the account holder and the named beneficiary's legal guardian, which was me. The financial institution had, after some back and forth, agreed to add the notation. This was not a guarantee. Rosalind could still move the money if she was determined enough. But it meant that if she tried, she would encounter friction. She would be asked questions. There would be a paper trail. And paper trails, in my experience, are the thing that people like Rosalind do not account for when they are planning things they intend to be invisible. I drove home from Linda's house that Sunday evening with Macy asleep in the backseat, her head tilted against the window the way it always does when she is really, truly out, and I thought about everything I had built in the 11 years since she was born, not just the money, not just the accounts, but the careful, patient architecture of a life that no one could dismantle without consequence. Everything I had built was about to be tested in front of everyone who had ever underestimated me. And I had never been more ready. Rosalind's 82nd birthday party was scheduled for the second Saturday of October, 2023. My Aunt Linda had booked the private room at a restaurant called Hargrove's, a place Rosalind liked because the tablecloths were real linen and the staff wore jackets. There were going to be 43 people. I knew this because Linda had sent a group message with the RSVP count 3 weeks before, the kind of message that exists partly as logistics and partly as a reminder that the family is large and Rosalind is at the center of it. I confirmed my attendance. I arranged for Macy to be there. She was 10 by then, old enough to sit through a dinner, young enough that no one would think twice about her being present. I bought Rosalind a gift, a leather-bound journal she had mentioned wanting, and I wrapped it carefully. I did all the normal things a person does before a family birthday party, and then on the Thursday before the dinner I called Colette Varga. "I need you there," I told her. "Not at the table, outside the room, available." There was a brief pause. "You're expecting something to happen." "I'm expecting her to make an announcement. She's been building toward it for 2 years and she likes an audience." "What do you need from me if she does?" "I need you to walk in when I text you. That's all, just walk in." Another pause, shorter this time. "I'll be there." I thanked her and hung up. Then I went to the drawer where I keep documents that matter and I took out two things: the original notarized letter, which Rosalind had mailed me 11 years earlier, and a one-page summary that Colette had prepared, outlining the enforceability of the promise and the specific remedies available to me. I put both of them in a slim folder. I put the folder in my bag. I did not tell my mother I was bringing it. I did not tell anyone. On Saturday evening, I dressed Macy in the blue dress she liked, put on my own clothes without fuss, and drove us to Hargrove's. The room was loud when we arrived. Rosalind was already at the head table, accepting attention the way she always did, graciously, expansively, with the particular warmth she reserved for public performances. She was wearing a silk blouse in deep burgundy, and her hair was set the way she'd been wearing it since the 1990s. She looked wonderful. I will not pretend otherwise. She has always known how to present herself. My mother found me near the entrance and touched my arm. She looked slightly anxious in the way she had been looking slightly anxious for the past 2 years. "You came?" "Of course I came, it's her birthday." "Macy looks beautiful." She bent down to hug my daughter, and Macy hugged her back and immediately asked if there was bread on the table yet. My mother laughed, genuinely laughed, and the tension in her face eased for a moment. We found our seats. The table assignments put me about halfway down the main table, close enough to the head that I would see everything, far enough that I was not in the immediate center of attention. My Uncle Dale was 2 seats to my left, already working on his first glass of wine. My cousin Delia was at the far end with Trevor, who was wearing a suit jacket that probably cost more than my car payment. Delia caught my eye across the table and gave me a small, polished smile, the smile of someone who knows something you don't and is already savoring it. I smiled back. I reached for the bread basket. The dinner moved through its paces. Appetizers, the noise of 43 people, toasts that were charming and warm and carefully shaped to flatter the woman at the head of the table. Rosalind laughed at the right moments and deflected compliments in the way that means she wants more of them. My mother watched her with the combination of love and fatigue that defines their relationship. Dale told a story about a golf trip that 3 people pretended to find interesting. Macy ate her dinner. She asked me quietly, around the halfway point of the main course, whether she could have the chocolate dessert she'd seen on the menu, and I said yes. And she smiled with her whole face the way she does and went back to talking to my mother about a book she was reading. I watched them for a moment, my daughter explaining a plot point she found especially unfair, my mother nodding seriously, treating the injustice of a fictional character with the gravity Macy needed, and I felt something very clear and very still settle into place in my chest. Whatever happened in the next hour, Macy was going to be fine. I had made sure of that years ago. Everything that was about to happen was not about saving her. It was about something else entirely. It was about the letter in my bag, and the woman at the head of the table, and the 43 years it had taken me to understand that some promises can only be kept by the person who was never supposed to be strong enough to enforce them. Rosalind stood for the second toast just as the dessert plates were being cleared. She thanked everyone for coming. She talked about family in the language she has always used for it, as a thing she built, a thing she tends, a legacy she intends to leave deliberately. She named each of her children. She named several of her grandchildren. She talked about what it means to love people across generations. And then she turned to Delia. "I want to take a moment," she said, "to do something I have been thinking about for a long time." Her voice had the quality it gets when she has rehearsed something, clear, precise, slightly formal. "As many of you know, Delia and Trevor are building a life together, a real life, and I have decided that the best gift I can give them, the gift that means something, is a foundation, something to build on." I put my fork down, very carefully. "I have decided to redirect the college fund." She said it cleanly, without apology, the The way you say something you have already decided is not open for debate. $92,000. It will go to Delia and Trevor to be used toward their home and their future. This is what I want to do with my money in my lifetime, while I can see it make a difference. The room absorbed this in the particular way that family rooms absorb announcements that are not quite comfortable, with a half second of stillness, and then the sound of people deciding how to respond. A few people nodded. A few people looked at their plates. Dale lifted his glass slightly, as though preparing for a toast. My mother's hand, beside me, went flat on the tablecloth. I looked at Macy. She was watching Rosalind with the expression of a child who has registered that something has happened but does not yet know what it means. Rosalind had not looked at me yet. She was looking at Delia, who was dabbing at the corner of her eye with a gesture that had been performed, not felt. Trevor's hand was on the table, very still. Then Rosalind looked at me. I know some of you may be surprised, she said, and the way she inflected it made clear she was speaking to me and framing it for the room. I want you all to understand I never made a binding promise. I made an intention. Intentions can change. Something inside me that had been very still for a very long time became something else entirely. I never promised that, she continued, addressing the room now, not me. And I think I know that this is the right thing for this family. I reached into my bag. My mother said very quietly, Nora. I did not look at her. I pulled out the folder. I opened it. I took out the notarized letter, the original, on the slightly yellowed paper of 11 years ago with the notary's seal pressed into the bottom right corner. I stood up. The room noticed. People notice when someone stands during a speech. I'm going to read something, I said. My voice was completely level. I apologize for the interruption. It will only take a moment. Rosalind's expression shifted. Not dramatically, she is not a dramatic woman outwardly, but something moved behind her eyes, like a calculation running very fast and coming up with an answer she didn't like. I reviewed the letter aloud. This money was always for Macy. It is held in trust for her education and is not to be redirected, reassigned, or dispersed for any purpose other than her college costs. This commitment is made freely, without condition, and is intended to be binding upon my estate. I looked up. It was notarized on April 7th, 2013. It has a witness signature from my Aunt Linda. The room had gone to a different kind of quiet than the one before, not the quiet of absorption. The quiet of people who understood that something was happening that they had not been prepared for. Linda, from across the table, was looking at the tablecloth with an expression I had never seen on her face before, not guilt exactly, but the face of someone who has suddenly understood the geometry of a situation they thought they were standing outside of. That was when the door to the private room opened, and Colette Varga walked in. Colette is 51 years old. She has dark hair cut very short, and she dresses in the understated way of someone who learned long ago that her presence is enough. She was carrying a leather portfolio. She looked, as she always does, like someone who has been in many rooms where things were decided, and who is never the most surprised person in them. She crossed to where I was standing, and she did not rush. Rosalind's eyes moved to Colette and then back to me, and for the first time in my memory, my grandmother looked like someone who had not accounted for a variable. Rosalind's chin came up. Who is this? Colette Varga. She's my attorney. A pause. Exactly 3 seconds, and I counted them. You brought a lawyer to my birthday party. I brought documentation to your birthday party. I kept my voice even. The lawyer is a courtesy. Dale set his wine glass down with a sound that was slightly too loud for the moment. He opened his mouth, then apparently found nothing useful in it and closed it again. Rosalind straightened. Whatever calculation had been running behind her eyes had arrived at a strategy, and the strategy was dignity. She had run on dignity for 82 years, and she was not about to abandon it now. Nora, this is not the time or place for this kind of. You chose the time and place. The words came out flat and clear. I didn't stand up until you made the announcement. Delia's hand went to her throat, not dramatically, just a small, reflexive movement toward the necklace she always wears. Trevor, beside her, pulled his phone out and put it face down on the table, then looked at it and picked it back up. The letter is a statement of intent, Rosalind said. Her voice had dropped into a register I recognized, the register she uses when she wants to sound reasonable while being entirely unreasonable. It is not a contract. It does not have legal force. Colette spoke for the first time. Her tone was exactly the kind of calm that is not soothing. Actually, Mrs. Mace, it meets the standard for a promissory document in this state. The specificity of the amount, the named beneficiary, and the notarized signature establish an enforceable obligation. I am happy to walk through the relevant case law if that would be useful. Rosalind looked at Colette the way she looks at people who have said something inconvenient in public, with a contained fury that she was too controlled to show entirely. I am not interested in a legal lecture at my birthday dinner. Then I'll be brief. Colette placed the portfolio on the table in front of her and opened it. We've already been in contact with the financial institution holding the account. Any transfer of the funds would require documented authorization from both you and the legal guardian of the named beneficiary. That's Nora. Any attempt to process a transfer without that authorization would trigger a hold pending legal review, and we've been assured the institution will honor that hold. The color did not drain from Rosalind's face all at once. It went in stages, first something around the eyes, a kind of tightening, then the line of her mouth going very flat, and then the moment when I watched her understand, fully and without any remaining ambiguity, that the thing she had planned to do tonight was not going to happen. Delia made a sound. Not a word, just a sound, somewhere between surprise and grief and something I could not name. Grandma. Delia's voice was smaller than I had ever heard it. I thought you said, Delia. Rosalind's voice was short. She did not look at her granddaughter. Trevor looked at Delia. Delia was looking at Rosalind. Rosalind was looking at me. You did all of this, Rosalind said, not a question, an accounting. I prepared for what I could see coming. I sat down, not dramatically, I had been standing long enough. I set the folder on the table in front of me. You made a promise, it was written down, it was notarized. I have kept my copy for 11 years and I was hoping I would never need to use it, but you announced, in front of 43 people, that you were going to give Macy's college fund to Delia for a wedding. So here we are. It is my money. Her voice had found something colder underneath the dignity. I set it up, I funded it. And the letter you signed says exactly what it was set up for. I looked at her directly. I'm not asking you for anything, Rosalind. I'm telling you that the account cannot be moved. That's not a negotiation. It's what the situation is. Dale leaned forward. His face had the quality of someone who had been planning to be useful in this moment and was discovering that the moment had moved past the point where he could be. Nora, your grandmother is 82 years old on her birthday. You couldn't have handled this privately? She made the announcement publicly. I looked at him without any particular heat. I responded to it. Linda, who had not spoken since the letter had been reviewed aloud, looked up. Her voice, when it came out, was careful. The witness signature. She touched the corner of the tablecloth. I didn't understand what I was signing when she had me sign it. Linda, Rosalind's voice was a warning. I'm not saying anything against you. Linda looked at her sister with something complicated in her expression, not betrayal, not accusation, just a kind of exhausted clarity. I'm saying I didn't understand what the document was. She told me it was a letter of intention. She didn't use the word binding. The notary explained it, I said quietly. The notary is required to. The document is what it says it is. Linda pressed her lips together. She looked at her hands. She did not say anything else. Rosalind had been very still for the past 40 seconds, long enough that the people close to her had started to notice. She was not a woman who was ever very still. She was always moving, always adjusting, always managing the room. Stillness on Rosalind was the way snow is wrong on a warm afternoon. You know immediately that something has changed in the atmosphere. When she spoke again, her voice had lost the formal quality it had held all evening. Not its control, never that, but the performance of graciousness had come down. I wanted to do something for this family, she said. I wanted to do something while I was still here to see it. Delia and Trevor need a start. Macy has time. She has you. She's going to be fine. Her eyes moved briefly to my daughter, who was watching everything with the particular attention of a child who knows the adults are doing something important but is not yet sure what it costs. I was not trying to hurt anyone. I believed her. This is the thing that people do not expect me to say, and it is true. Rosalind was not trying to hurt Macy. She was doing what she has always done, making a decision about her resources, her family, her legacy, and arranging the facts afterward to support the decision she had already made. The hurt was incidental, the harm was real. I know you weren't, I said, but the promise was real too, and I'm not going to let Macy lose it because you changed your mind. Rosalind looked at me for a long moment. I looked back. For 3 full seconds, nobody at our end of the table made a sound. Then Delia stood up. Her chair scraped back and she pressed both hands flat on the table, and she looked at Rosalind with an expression that I had never seen from Delia before, not the polished social composure, not the practiced warmth she deployed at family events. Something rower. Is this true? Is the money blocked? The transfer cannot be processed without Nora's authorization, Colette said. That's accurate. Delia's hands were very still on the tablecloth. She was breathing audibly. So the whole you told us. You told us it was handled. You told Trevor's family that you were contributing to. She stopped. Her voice had fractured somewhere in the middle of the sentence, and she was working to hold the rest of it together. Grandma, Rosalind's expression shifted into something I had very rarely seen: uncertainty. Not remorse, not yet, but the look of someone who has overextended in 2 directions and discovered that the distance between them is greater than they measured. She had promised the money to Delia. She had written a letter promising it to Macy. She had believed perhaps that the letter was old enough and informal enough that it would not hold. She had believed wrong. "We will figure it out," Rosalind said. Her voice had lost its sureness. Trevor put both hands on the back of his chair. He was looking at the center of the table, not at anyone specifically, with the expression of a man who is recalculating something substantial. He had been counting on $92,000 for a house. That number had just disappeared from his personal balance sheet in a room full of people who would now know it had. "Figure it out how," he said, flat, no performance in it at all. Rosalind did not answer him. My mother, who had been silent beside me for the duration of all of this, reached over and covered my hand with hers. She did not say anything. She just left her hand there, and I felt the 11 years of watching her navigate the space between me and Rosalind collapse into that single gesture, and I let it be what it was. If you are still with me, stay, because what happened in the next 20 minutes is the reason this story ends the way it does. Colette opened the portfolio fully and placed two documents on the table. The first was the copy of the institutional hold notification, a letter on the bank's letterhead, confirming that the account had been flagged pending the legal review. The second was a formal demand letter, which Colette had prepared 6 months earlier and which I had authorized her to deliver if and when the moment arrived. The demand letter said, in the precise and undecorated language that attorneys use when they want something to be unambiguous, that Rosalind Mace had made a legally binding promissory commitment to fund Macy's education, that the commitment was documented and notarized, that any attempt to redirect or diminish the fund would be met with a civil action seeking the full amount plus damages plus attorney's fees, and that we were prepared to proceed immediately if necessary. Colette placed it in front of Rosalind without comment. Rosalind did not look at it immediately. She looked at her hands, which were folded on the table, and then she looked at Delia, and I watched something happen in her face that I do not have a precise word for. It was the moment when a person who has been running a story in their head, a story in which they are the reasonable one, the generous one, the one who simply changed her mind about a private matter, comes into contact with the version of events that exists outside their head, in documents and institutional letterhead, and the faces of 43 people who now know what was promised and to whom. "I need a moment," Rosalind said. "Of course." Colette's voice was not unkind. Rosalind did not move immediately. She sat very still, and then she did something I had not expected, which was that she looked at Macy. Macy was watching her great-grandmother with the direct, uncomplicated attention of a child who has not yet learned to look away from difficult things. She did not look frightened. She looked like she was trying to understand something. Rosalind's face moved in a way that was small and fast and real, not performed, not calculated. It lasted about 2 seconds, then she looked away. She picked up the demand letter. She held it for a moment. Then she put it back on the table and looked at Colette. "What do you need from me?" she said. The confrontation, the one I had been preparing for in one form or another for 2 years, ended not with any dramatic final speech or a breakdown that spread across the room, but with those 5 words. "What do you need from me?" Said in the voice of a woman who has spent 82 years being the person who asks nothing and directs everything, and who has arrived in the private room of a restaurant on her birthday at the end of that particular road. Colette outlined the steps. Rosalind would sign a document confirming that the account designation remained unchanged and that no transfer would be initiated. The institutional hold would be lifted once that document was received. The account would continue to grow, untouched, until Macy was ready for college. We were not seeking damages. We were not initiating litigation. We were asking for the enforcement of the promise that had been made. Rosalind signed the document that night. Colette had brought a copy for that purpose, because that is the kind of attorney Colette is. Dale watched the signing from his end of the table with his wine glass still in his hand and an expression that suggested he was privately revising several years of assumptions. He did not say anything. He had been the loudest voice in the family for the longest time, and on the night it actually mattered, he had found he had no leverage to offer either side. Linda was crying quietly. Not dramatically, just the contained kind of crying that happens when you have understood something too late and are absorbing the shape of it. She had signed the original letter without knowing its weight. She was learning it now. Delia and Trevor left before dessert was served. I saw them go, Delia's coat pulled tight, Trevor with his hand at the small of her back, both of them carrying the particular tension of people who had been counting on something that was not theirs to count on. I felt watching them leave something that was not satisfaction exactly, more like the specific sadness of watching a consequence land where it was always going to land. My mother squeezed my hand once more before she let go of it. "I should have done something earlier," she said, very quiet, "just for me." "You didn't know how," I told her. "That's different from not caring." She looked at me, her eyes were bright. When did you get so steady? I had a good reason to be. In the weeks that followed, Colette finalized the paperwork. The account holder designation was formally confirmed in writing, the institutional notation was updated to reflect the resolution, and a copy of the signed agreement was filed with the appropriate documents in Colette's office. The account, as of that October, held 93,000 and change, the original fund plus 11 years of compound growth that Rosalind had, to her credit, never touched. Rosalind did not call me in the days after the party. She called my mother twice, in conversations that my mother described to me as difficult and short. Rosalind did not apologize, in any of those calls, for the announcement she had made. She did say, my mother told me this with a careful neutrality, that she understood now that the document was binding and that she would honor it, which was, for Rosalind, as close to a concession as she had ever made in 82 years of decisions. Delia and Trevor's wedding did happen the following spring. It was smaller than originally planned, and it was not held in the venue they had booked. I was not invited, which I understood and did not contest. I have heard through my mother that the marriage is intact. I wish them no particular harm. I never did. The money was not their fault. They were handed a promise that was not Rosalind's to make, and when it disappeared, they had to rebuild their plans from what they actually had. That is a hard thing. It is not the hardest thing. As for the 529 account I had been building on my own, the one Gordon Ellery had been managing since Macy was 18 months old, it crossed $112,000 by the following March. Rosalind's fund, combined with what I had built independently, means that Macy's education is not just secured. It is settled. There is nothing left to threaten. Macy is 11 now. She does not know the full shape of what happened at Rosalind's birthday party. She knows there was an argument. She knows I handled it. Last month, she asked me if we were still going to visit great-grandma Rosalind at Christmas, and I told her we were, because Rosalind is her great-grandmother, and that relationship belongs to Macy to decide about when she is old enough to decide about it, not to me. Macy said okay, and went back to the chapter book she'd been reading, completely unbothered. I drove home that October night with Macy asleep in the back seat, the folder on the passenger seat, and the quiet that comes after a long time of holding something carefully and finally being able to put it down. I did not feel triumphant. I felt something more durable than that. I felt like a person who had kept a promise to her own daughter, which is the only kind of keeping that matters. So, did I go too far, or not far enough? Tell me in the comments.